The room smelled of burnt coffee and anxiety. 20 mismatched chairs formed a circle in the community center, and a banner overhead read, "Dating After Divorce, Finding Yourself First." Sarah Chen had attended exactly 4 self-help workshops in her life. 3 were mandatory HR training. This was number 4. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, like she was waiting for a performance review. She was dressed in what her daughter called hospital administrator chic, structured blazer, minimal jewelry, the armor of competence. At the front of the room, Elena Morales stood by a whiteboard. The squeak of dry erase marker punctuated her words as she wrote, "What story are you telling yourself?" She addressed the group with that particular warmth of someone who'd survived what she was teaching. "Here's the thing about divorce," Elena said, her voice carrying easily across the circle. "It's not actually an ending. It's more like finding out you've been reading the wrong instruction manual for 20 years. A few nervous laughs rippled through the group. Sarah didn't laugh. She was taking notes, her pen moving with the precision of someone who documented everything. Someone who believed that life could be organized if you just used the right system. Elena leaned against the table with casual authority. "So, tonight, I want you to think about what you've been telling yourself about who you are, and then ask, is that story true or just familiar?" Sarah's pen hovered over her notebook. The weight of it suddenly felt enormous, this small instrument that had signed hospital budgets, discharge papers, divorce documents. She wrote one word, responsible. Then she underlined it twice, the marker squeaking its approval on the page. When the workshop ended, people gathered their coats with the hurried efficiency of those desperate to leave before feeling anything else. Sarah remained seated, waiting with the patience of someone used to staying late for budget meetings. Elena noticed her there, still and deliberate in the emptying room, like a question mark. She approached, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. "You can leave feedback forms blank," she said, with a smile in her voice. "I won't be offended." Sarah looked up, her tone dry as winter air. "Oh, I filled it out. You got a 4.5 out of 5. You lost half a point for the burnt coffee." Elena laughed, surprised, genuine, the kind of laugh that changes someone's face entirely. "Noted. Next time, I'll spring for the good stuff." Sarah stood, brushing invisible lint from her blazer in that nervous gesture of someone who needs her hands to do something, anything. "Actually, I was hoping to ask you something, professionally." The air shifted between them. Elena's expression changed, interested but cautious. The look of someone who'd heard many versions of what came next. "I do private coaching," she said carefully, measuring the space between them. "If that's what you're asking." "It is," Sarah replied, her voice steady and practiced. "Though I should clarify, I'm not recently divorced because of irreconcilable differences." Elena's voice softened like fabric. "Most people aren't." Sarah took a breath, and her practiced composure flickered, like a candle finding wind. "I'm recently divorced because I'm gay. Well, recently acknowledged. I've been gay the whole time, obviously. I just—" She stopped, then recovered with humor as her shield. "I didn't schedule time in the calendar to figure that out. Oversight on my part." Elena Morales had heard this story before, shaped by different words, but always the same underneath. She'd made a career out of guiding people through the wilderness of late self-discovery, watching them emerge, blinking, into a light they'd forgotten existed. Her face softened, like dusk. "How long have you known?" she asked gently. "Depends on your definition of known," Sarah said, tilting her head as though calculating acceptable margins of error. "Intellectually, about a year. Emotionally, could we pretend I'm more evolved than I am?" Elena's smile was small and knowing. "Not if you want me to help." 1 week later, they met at a different cafe, a better one, where the air smelled like espresso and honey, warm and slightly sweet. The kind of place where sunlight pooled on wooden tables like spilled gold. Elena already sat at a corner table with 2 mugs waiting, steam rising in delicate spirals. Sarah arrived exactly on time. Of course she did. She carried a manila folder like it held state secrets, and Elena glanced at it with clear amusement dancing in her eyes. "Did you bring a presentation?" she asked. "I brought notes," Sarah said, her voice defensive and self-aware in equal measure. "Is that excessive?" "It's very you." Sarah didn't know if that was a compliment. She slid the folder across the table with both hands, the sound of paper on wood like a deal being struck. Elena let it sit there unopened, her fingers drumming a soft rhythm against the table's surface. "Before we start," Elena said, leaning forward with professional care, "I need to understand what you're looking for. Coaching can mean a lot of things." Sarah shifted into businesslike mode, her spine straightening by degrees. "I need someone to teach me how to date women, not theoretically, practically. I'm 42 years old. I've been in exactly one relationship, and I don't know how to—" She gestured vaguely, her hand moving through empty air like reaching for words that didn't exist yet. "Any of it. The flirting, the signals. I can run an emergency department during a mass casualty event, but I can't tell if someone's being friendly or interested. I need a manual." "There isn't one," Elena said simply, the words landing like stones in still water. "Then I need someone to pretend there is." Silence settled between them, thick and intentional. Elena studied Sarah, really looked at her, with the gaze of someone who made their living reading the unspoken. Sarah held the eye contact longer than expected, unflinching. Elena spoke carefully, weighing each word like currency. "I don't do casual dating coaching. My practice focuses on deeper work, understanding patterns, attachment styles, why we choose what we choose." "I know why I chose what I chose," Sarah said with the confidence of someone who'd done the analysis, filed the reports, reviewed the data. "Safety, heteronormativity, denial. I'm very self-aware about my lack of self-awareness." Elena laughed despite herself, a sound that surprised them both. "That was almost profound." "It's a defense mechanism," Sarah admitted. "If I joke first, no one else can." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to something more intimate, more real. "I know. I do it too." The air shifted with recognition. 2 people who'd perfected the art of deflection, seeing themselves reflected back in unexpected company. Elena opened the folder, the sound of paper unfolding filling the small space between them. Inside lay a typed document with sections, subsections, a timeline laid out like architectural plans. "You wrote a scope of work?" Her voice climbed with incredulity. "With deliverables," Sarah confirmed, matter of fact. 8 sessions. You teach me the basics. How to flirt, how to read interest, how to exist in queer spaces without looking like someone's bewildered aunt. I pay your rate. Clear boundaries. Professional. Sarah, this isn't a project plan. The words hung there, suspended in the honey-scented air. Everything's a project plan, if you're scared enough, Sarah said quietly. The humor was gone now, stripped away like paint revealing the wood beneath. Elena set the paper down, her fingers resting on its edge. Crisp, formal, heartbreakingly vulnerable. What are you actually afraid of? She asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She picked up her coffee mug, the warm ceramic pressed against her palms like an anchor, and held it like a shield between her chest and the world. That I'm too late, she finally said, her voice stripped bare. That I wasted 20 years being the person everyone needed, and now I don't know how to be anything else. That I'll finally try to live my life and discover I'm bad at it. Elena's expression softened with understanding she'd earned the hard way, paid for in her own currency of heartbreak and resilience. You're not too late. You don't know that, Sarah whispered. No, Elena agreed. But I know you're here. That counts for something. Sarah looked down at her coffee, the surface rippling with her breath, and gave a small nod. Elena should have said no. She had rules about this, about clients who were newly out, still tender, still figuring out which version of themselves was real. She'd been the training ground before, and it had left marks that still ached in certain weather. But she picked up a pen, and the scratch of ink was deliberate and final. 8 sessions, Elena said. We start with basics and see where it goes, but I need you to understand, this isn't about making you into someone else. It's about finding out who you already are. Sarah's voice carried self-protection like a second skin. What if who I am is boring? Elena met her eyes, steady and certain, like making a promise. You're not boring, Sarah. The way she said the name, familiar, warm, like she'd been saying it for years instead of minutes, made Sarah look up. Their eyes held. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Later, Elena would recognize this as the moment she should have known, that this wouldn't stay professional, that contracts were just paper when the person across from you looked at you like you were the answer to a question they were still learning to ask. Sarah took the contract back, folding it carefully into her bag with reverent attention, like tucking away something sacred. This paper mattered. This moment mattered. So, she said, a hint of smile in her voice now. When do we start? Elena's smile was small and genuine, reaching her eyes. We just did. The cafe noise filled the space between them, the hiss of steam like breathing, low conversations in languages they didn't speak, the clink of spoons against ceramic, like small bells ringing. Outside the window, the city moved forward in its relentless way, indifferent to the quiet revolutions happening over coffee. Inside, 2 women sat across from each other, a table between them. That wouldn't stay a boundary for long. The bookstore smelled like old paper and ambition. Not the musty kind of old, the good kind. The kind that suggested every book had been read at least twice and loved enough to be reshelved with care. Sarah stood just inside the doorway of a room of one's own books, her blazer feeling approximately 2 sizes too tight across her shoulders. It wasn't actually too tight. She'd checked 3 times in the car. but her body had decided that nervousness lived in her chest now, constricting like a fist. Elena stood beside her, calm as Sunday morning, holding 2 glasses of wine that someone had thrust into their hands the moment they'd crossed the threshold. "Remember the assignment," Elena said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. "Don't talk to anyone, just watch. Tell me, what do you see?" "That's it?" Sarah asked. Her administrator brain was already trying to create metrics and assessment criteria. "Just observe?" "Just observe," Elena confirmed with a small smile. "Think of it as reconnaissance." Sarah could do reconnaissance. Reconnaissance was strategic, professional, not terrifying at all. The space was intimate, maybe 40 people scattered between bookshelves and a small, cleared area where a poet was preparing to read. Soft lighting cast everything in warm amber tones, and someone had strung fairy lights along the exposed brick wall in a way that managed to feel deliberate rather than desperate. A chalkboard near the entrance announced, "Sappho Sundays, poetry launch with Morgan Chen." Sarah took a sip of wine she didn't taste and began her assessment. The crowd skewed younger than her, though not uniformly so. There was a woman near the biography section who had to be in her 50s, gray hair cut short and precise, wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to exactly mid-forearm. She was deep in conversation with someone half her age, who had bright pink hair and more piercings than Sarah could count without staring. "What do you see?" Elena asked again, her therapist voice gentle but insistent. "I see people who know each other," Sarah said slowly, watching the way bodies oriented toward one another, the casual touches on shoulders and arms. Or who want to. "Good. What else?" Sarah's eyes tracked across the room with the same focus she used during hospital inspections. A couple stood by the wine table. One woman was black, with locks wrapped in a brilliant green scarf. The other, white, with tattoos covering both arms in intricate patterns. They weren't touching, but they existed in each other's orbit like binary stars, constantly aware of where the other stood. Near the poetry section, a trans woman with a voice like honey was making 3 other people laugh, her hands moving as she talked, rings catching the light. She wore a vintage dress that looked like it had survived several decades and gotten better with age. And when she laughed, it was the kind of sound that made other people want to laugh too. "Nobody looks like they're in a manual," Sarah said quietly, and something in her chest loosened slightly. "They just look comfortable." Elena's smile was warm with approval. "That's because there is no manual, Sarah. There's just people being themselves." The sound of a Doc Marten boot hitting the wood floor punctuated someone's arrival. That distinctive heavy soul that somehow managed to sound both practical and defiant. Sarah found herself cataloging details she'd never noticed before. The way someone tucked their hair behind their ear and left their hand there a moment too long when talking to someone attractive. The carabiner clipped to a belt loop that clearly wasn't holding any keys. The woman wearing a blazer not unlike Sarah's own, but paired with jeans and boots in a way that suggested she'd never spent 20 years trying to look appropriate for a husband's work events. "I feel like a spy," Sarah admitted, her voice dropping even lower. "Like I'm in a land where I belong, but don't have the passport." "You have the passport," Elena said. "You just haven't looked at it yet." Sarah wanted to argue, to explain that there was a difference between knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones, but the poet was being introduced, and the room was settling into attentive quiet. Morgan Chen was tiny and fierce, probably 30, with undercut hair and a collection of pins on her denim jacket that Sarah couldn't read from this distance. She approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how many words it took to break a heart and rebuild it. "This first poem," Morgan said, her voice clear and unapologetic, "is called Learning to Say Her Name Out Loud." The poem was about desire and fear and the specific terror of wanting something you'd been taught not to want. Sarah felt every word like a finger pressed against a bruise she'd been pretending didn't exist. When it ended, the room erupted in snaps instead of applause, that finger-clicking thing Sarah had only seen in movies. She tried it, felt ridiculous, but no one was looking at her. Everyone was looking at the poet, who was smiling like she'd just told them all a secret. Elena leaned close, her breath warm against Sarah's ear. "Now, look around. Tell me who in this room is available and interested in meeting someone." Sarah's administrator brain engaged with relief. Finally, a task with parameters. She scanned the room with renewed purpose, and her eyes landed on the obvious choice almost immediately. Near the front, standing with impeccable posture, was quite possibly the most beautiful woman Sarah had ever seen in person. She had dark hair that fell in perfect waves, bone structure that belonged on magazine covers, and a dress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly parking fee. She was alone, holding her wine glass with elegant fingers, and she'd been making eye contact with various people all evening. "Her," Sarah said with quiet certainty, nodding slightly toward the vision in designer clothing. "The woman in the black dress by the front. She's been scanning the room, making eye contact. She's alone." "Mm-hmm," Elena said, noncommittal. And she's clearly confident, comfortable, probably very experienced with—" Sarah stopped, realizing she was creating a fantasy rather than an observation. "She looks available?" Elena's smile was patient, the kind teachers gave students who'd solved the wrong problem with perfect math. "She looks performative. She's practicing. Watch her eyes. She makes contact, but doesn't hold it. She's working on her courage. Same as you." Sarah felt her certainty crumble, like old concrete. "Now," Elena continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "look at the woman in the corner. Gray cardigan, sitting alone with a book." Sarah found her after a moment, easy to miss, tucked into an armchair that faced away from the main crowd. She was younger than Sarah, maybe mid-30s, with light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore dark-framed glasses and had the kind of stillness that suggested she was completely comfortable being alone, in a room full of people. On her lapel, a small enamel pin Sarah couldn't quite make out from this distance. "She's reading," Sarah said, "at a poetry event. She's not interested in meeting anyone?" "She's reading the same page," Elena corrected gently. "Has been for the last 10 minutes. And that pin is a rainbow infinity symbol, neurodivergent pride. She's here, Sarah. She's just here differently. Watch." As if on cue, a woman approached the reading corner, early 20s, nervous energy in her movements, and said something Sarah couldn't hear. The woman in the gray cardigan looked up, and her face transformed. Not into anything dramatic, no movie star smile. Just available, present. She said something brief, gestured to the empty chair beside her, and went back to her book while the younger woman settled in. That was it. No performance, no scanning the room, just a quiet welcome that suggested she'd been hoping someone might approach, and was glad when someone did. "Oh," Sarah said softly. "You're looking for fireworks, Sarah," Elena said, her voice warm with understanding, and something else. Something like shared experience, shared hurt. In this world, we look for the pilot light, the thing that's already burning, just waiting for the right person to notice. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not the tight panic from earlier, but something warmer. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. She watched the room with new eyes. The couple by the wine table had moved closer, fingers now loosely intertwined. The trans woman with the honey laugh was exchanging numbers with someone, both of them smiling with the kind of hope that hurt to witness. The woman in her 50s was buying a book from the author, their hands touching briefly as the signed copy changed hands. Sarah's blazer still felt too tight, and she still didn't know what half the signals meant, and she was still probably the oldest person in the room who'd just figured out she belonged here. But Elena was beside her, patient and knowing, and the wine was actually pretty good, and nobody was looking at her like she was out of place. "I almost left," Sarah admitted quietly. "When we first walked in, I thought I was too old for this." Elena didn't say anything. She just looked at Sarah, really looked at her, with an expression that managed to convey, "I know," and "I'm glad you stayed," and "You're exactly where you need to be," without using any words at all. The poet was introducing her next piece. Someone refilled the wine glasses. The fairy lights continued their warm glow against brick that had probably witnessed 100 quiet revelations. Just like this one. Sarah took a breath that actually reached her lungs. This time. "So," she said, keeping her voice light to cover the weight of what she was feeling. "Did I pass reconnaissance?" Elena's smile was genuine, reaching all the way to her eyes. "You're learning to see, Sarah. That's better than passing." Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm. Cars and voices and the particular sound of a world that didn't care about the small revolutions happening in bookstores. Inside, Sarah Chen stood with a wineglass in her hand and a coach beside her, who somehow made her feel less like a spy, and more like someone who was finally, slowly, coming home. She still didn't have the manual, but maybe, she was beginning to think, she didn't need one. The pilot light, after all, was already lit. She just had to learn to trust the warmth. Sarah's apartment looked like a hotel room, occupied by someone who'd been living there for 3 years, but never quite moved in. Everything was gray, or white, or the kind of beige that catalogs called greige, and actual humans called trying too hard to be neutral. The sofa was modern and uncomfortable, in that Scandinavian way that suggested sitting was a temporary condition. The kitchen counter held exactly 3 items: a coffee maker that looked expensive and unused, a bowl of decorative spheres that served no purpose, and a single succulent that Sarah watered on the 1st of every month, whether it needed it or not. There were no photographs, no throw pillows that didn't match, no evidence that a human being with preferences and history actually lived within these walls. The only concession to personality was a collection of candles on the bookshelf, expensive ones. The kind that came in heavy glass with names like Coastal Morning and Winter Cashmere. Sarah had never lit a single one. They were there because her daughter had given them to her last Christmas, with a card that read, "Mom, your apartment smells like nothing. This is weird. Love you? Sarah had arranged them by height. Now she stood in her own living room, feeling like a stranger, waiting for Elena to arrive for their third session. She'd spent 20 minutes deciding where to sit. The sofa felt too casual, the kitchen table too corporate, the armchair too therapist-y. She'd settled on standing, then immediately regretted it. The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock. Elena didn't do late. Sarah opened the door to find her coach holding 2 paper bags that smelled like Thai food and possibility. I brought dinner, Elena said with that easy warmth. Hope you like basil. I like basil, Sarah confirmed, which was both true and completely beside the point of the small crisis happening in her chest. Her apartment had been her sanctuary, the one place where she controlled every variable. Now Elena was here, filling it with the scent of lemongrass and the particular energy she carried like weather, and Sarah could feel her carefully maintained control, slipping sideways. They settled at the kitchen table, the corporate option winning by default, and Elena unpacked containers with the efficiency of someone who'd eaten dinner in stranger places than this. Pad Thai, spring rolls, something with coconut curry that made Sarah's mouth water, despite her nervousness. So, Elena said, serving them both with comfortable authority. How was your week? Any field observations on your own? I went to the hospital cafeteria, Sarah offered. Elena's eyebrow raised with obvious amusement. There's a nurse in the pediatric unit who has a rainbow pin on her badge. I noticed it. That counts, right? Did you talk to her? I filed it away, for future reference. Sarah. I'm building a database, Sarah said defensively, her fork hovering over noodles. You can't approach without data. Elena laughed, not unkindly, but with the recognition of someone watching a person try to Excel spreadsheet their way into vulnerability. That's exactly the problem. You're treating human connection like a hospital budget. Hospital budgets make sense, Sarah countered. People are not that. No, Elena agreed, setting down her fork with deliberate care. They're not. Which brings us to tonight's homework. The word homework made Sarah sit up straighter. Her administrator brain was engaging with relief. Homework had parameters, deliverables, success metrics. Elena pulled a small notebook from her bag, the kind with soft leather binding that writers carried, and clicked her pen once. The sound was small, but definitive, in Sarah's quiet apartment. Flirting, Elena said, is just noticing, with intention. That's cryptic, Sarah said. It's accurate. You're already good at noticing. You proved that at the bookstore. But you notice like you're cataloging data. Tonight, we're going to practice noticing like you actually care. What you're seeing. Sarah's stomach did something complicated that had nothing to do with Thai food. The assignment, Elena continued, her voice taking on that gentle authority that made Sarah want to both comply and run for the exit, is simple. I want you to give me a compliment. Silence filled the space between them, like water filling a glass. A compliment, Sarah repeated slowly, as though the words were in a language she didn't speak. Something you've noticed about me. Something genuine. Sarah's mind went immediately, unhelpfully, blank. She could list Elena's professional qualities: punctuality, clear communication, the ability to make people feel seen without making them feel exposed. But those weren't compliments. Those were performance review notes. Take your time, Elena said, leaning back in her chair with the patience of someone who'd waited through harder silences than this. Sarah took a breath and engaged her strategic thinking. What made a compliment effective? Specificity, sincerity, observation of something the other person valued. She could do this. This was just interpersonal project management. I appreciate your punctuality, Sarah began, her voice taking on the same tone she used for departmental meetings. And your professional attire. You present yourself in a way that builds credibility while remaining approachable. It's an effective combination. The words landed in the room and died there, embarrassing and earnest. Elena's expression was carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Not quite amusement, more like recognition of exactly how much work they had ahead of them. Sarah, she said gently, that was a LinkedIn recommendation. It was sincere, Sarah protested weakly. It was corporate. Try again. I don't. Sarah stopped, frustration rising like heat. I don't know what you want. I want you to tell me something you've actually noticed. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what's professionally appropriate. Just something real. Sarah felt her blazer. Yes, she was wearing a blazer in her own apartment. Sue her, constricting across her shoulders again. The panic was back, the sense that she was failing a test she didn't know how to study for. Close your eyes, Elena said. What? Close your eyes? You're overthinking. Stop looking at me like I'm a problem to solve. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling ridiculous and exposed in equal measure. The sounds of her apartment became suddenly loud, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, her own breathing that was faster than it should be. Now, Elena's voice came softly, closer than before. Tell me something you've noticed about me. Don't think. Just answer. Sarah's mind cycled through observations like shuffling cards. The way Elena dressed in colors that suggested she'd stopped caring what people thought. The way she asked questions that made you feel like your answer actually mattered. The way she... I like the way you don't look at your watch when I'm talking, Sarah said, the words coming out before she could edit them. Like you have all the time in the world, like there's nowhere else you'd rather be, even when I'm being difficult, which I know I am. But you just stay. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one had weight, presence, the kind of quiet that happens when something true has been said, and both people are trying to figure out what it means. Sarah opened her eyes. Elena was looking at her with an expression that made Sarah's stomach do that complicated thing again, but stronger this time, more insistent. That, Elena said softly, and her voice had changed in a way Sarah couldn't quite name, was a real compliment. The air between them felt different, thinner, somehow, like the professional boundary they'd been maintaining had become visible, and was now wavering like heat rising from summer pavement. Sarah reached for her water glass, needing something to do with her hands. Was that the assignment? She asked, trying to return to safer ground. Did I pass? Elena didn't answer immediately. She was still looking at Sarah, in that way that made her feel simultaneously seen, and safe, and terrified. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. I learned to be present like that, the hard way, Elena said. There was something vulnerable in her tone now, something personal breaking through the professional. I'm Mexican-American, first generation. My family, they loved me, but they didn't always have time to sit with what I was feeling. There was always work, always something more urgent. When I came out, my mother literally stood up and started doing dishes in the middle of my coming out speech. Sarah's chest tightened with recognition of old pain wrapped in humor. So I learned, Elena continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass in small, precise circles, that the most radical thing you can do for someone is just stay, be present, not try to fix it, or move past it, or make it easier. Just witness it. That's why I don't look at my watch, Sarah. Because someone should have stayed for me, and they didn't. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, or maybe they felt closer in it. Sarah didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound trite, or performative, or like another LinkedIn recommendation masquerading as emotion. So she said the only true thing she could think of. I'm glad you stayed. Tonight, even though my apartment is depressing, and I gave you a performance review disguised as a compliment. Elena smiled, small and real, reaching her eyes in a way that made Sarah understand, finally, what people meant when they talked about warmth. Your apartment isn't depressing. It's just waiting. For what? For you to figure out who you are? Then it'll look like something. Outside, a siren passed. Someone's television played too loud through thin walls. The city continued its indifferent evening rhythm, while two women sat in a sterile kitchen that smelled like Thai basil and expensive unlit candles. Sarah's pen, the good one she used for signing hospital documents, sat on the table between them. Elena reached over and clicked it. Once, twice, 3 times. A fidget. A tell. The first nervous gesture Sarah had seen her make. Next session, Elena said, her voice finding its professional footing again, but not quite landing there. We're going to work on receiving compliments, because that face you made when I told you you're learning, we need to talk about that. What face? Sarah asked, genuinely confused. The one that says you don't believe me. I don't not believe you? Sarah. Elena's voice was gentle but firm. You're allowed to be good at this. You're allowed to be a late bloomer who figures it out. You don't have to stay in the waiting stage forever. The words landed somewhere deep, in a place Sarah had been avoiding looking at for 42 years. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They finished dinner with easier conversation, work stories, a debate about whether pad thai was better with extra lime or extra peanuts. When Elena left, she paused at the door. Light one of those candles, Sarah, she said, gesturing to the bookshelf. Your daughter was right. This place should smell like someone lives here. After the door closed, Sarah stood in her gray living room that was waiting to become something else. She walked to the bookshelf and picked up the tallest candle, winter cashmere, whatever that meant, and lit it for the first time. The flame caught and held. A pilot light, she thought, small and steady and already burning. She watched it for a long time, learning how to stay. The bar was called Nocturne, which Sarah thought was pretentious until she walked inside and realized it had earned the name. It was 11 o'clock on a Thursday, and the place existed in that particular slice of night when only insomniacs, service industry workers, and people avoiding going home remained awake. The lighting was low without being dark. Amber sconces on exposed brick. Candles on each small table that actually provided light, rather than just ambiance. A jazz trio played in the corner, the kind of music that didn't demand attention, but rewarded it if you paid. Sarah had been here exactly once before, for a retirement dinner she'd left early. Now she sat at the bar itself, a glass of whiskey in front of her that she'd ordered without overthinking, and waited. Elena had texted an hour ago. "Final exam. Meet me at Nocturne at 11. Dress like you're trying." Sarah had changed outfits 3 times. She'd settled on dark jeans that actually fit, and a charcoal sweater that her daughter had bought her with the instruction, "Mom, this makes you look gay. In a good way?" She'd left her blazer at home. It felt like progress. The bartender, a woman with sleeve tattoos and the calm efficiency of someone who'd heard every story, refilled Sarah's water without being asked. The sound of ice hitting glass was crisp and clean, in the low murmur of conversation. Elena arrived at 11:07, and Sarah felt her arrival before she saw her. That particular shift in air pressure that happened when someone you were waiting for finally appeared. She wore a deep burgundy shirt that looked like silk, dark jeans, and an expression that was half challenge, half something else Sarah was just learning to recognize. Want? Maybe? Or possibility? "You're late," Sarah said, as Elena slid onto the stool beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I wanted to see if you'd wait," Elena replied, flagging the bartender with easy confidence. "Mezcal. Neat. And whatever she's having." "I'm having whiskey I'm nursing to look sophisticated." "Then another whiskey. She'll actually drink." The bartender smiled, knowing, amused, and moved to pour. "So?" Sarah said, turning slightly so they were facing each other, knees almost touching in the geometry of bar stools. "Final exam. What are the parameters?" Elena's smile was slow and deliberate, like watching dawn break. "This is a practice date. You use everything I've taught you. I respond honestly. We see what happens. And if I fail, then we practice more." Elena accepted her mezcal from the bartender with a nod of thanks. "But you're not going to fail, Sarah. You've been paying attention." The jazz trio shifted into something slower, more intimate, a bass line that felt like a heartbeat. Sarah took a breath and engaged the assignment. 4 weeks ago, she would have cataloged this as an impossible situation. Too much pressure, too many variables. Her coach sitting close enough that Sarah could smell her perfume, which was something warm and woody that probably had a pretentious name like Autumn Reverie, but worked anyway. Now, she let herself notice. Not like data collection, like Elena had taught her, with intention. "You changed your earrings," Sarah said quietly, her eyes catching the small silver hoops that replaced Elena's usual studs. "They catch the light when you move your head. I like it." Elena's expression shifted. Surprised pleasure? Maybe? Or recognition that her student had been studying. "Good observation," she said, her voice dropping lower. "What else?" "You're nervous," Sarah continued, and watched Elena's eyebrow raise with challenge. "You ordered mezcal instead of wine. You told me once that mezcal was for when you needed courage, or wanted to forget something. And you're not the forgetting type." The air between them changed, thinned, the way it had in Sarah's kitchen, but stronger now, more deliberate. "Very good," Elena said softly. "Why am I nervous?" Sarah held her gaze. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Using the technique Elena had taught her that first week, when eye contact had felt like staring at the sun. Because this stopped being practice a while ago, and we're both pretending it hasn't. The words landed in the space between them like stones dropping into still water. Ripples extending outward, changing everything. Elena didn't look away, didn't deflect with humor, or redirect with a coaching question. She just sat with what Sarah had said, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass in those small, precise circles that Sarah now recognized as her tell. "You're right," Elena said finally. Her voice carried something raw in it, something unguarded. "I am nervous because you're supposed to be my client, Sarah, and I have rules about this. Good rules. Rules that have kept me from getting hurt by women who weren't ready, who needed me to be their teacher instead of their—" She stopped, took a sip of mezcal, let the smoke of it ground her. "Instead of their equal?" Sarah finished quietly. "Yes." The bartender moved past them, wiping down the far end of the bar, giving them privacy in the way good bartenders do, present, but invisible. Sarah felt her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The same feeling she'd had standing in the bookstore, but amplified now, unavoidable. This was the moment. The one where she could retreat into safety, into the clearly defined boundaries of their contract, into the comfortable lie that this was just professional development. Or she could step forward into the truth that had been building since Elena had signed her ridiculous scope of work 5 weeks ago. "I notice things about you too," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her like electricity. "Want to hear them?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "You touch your necklace when you're about to say something vulnerable," Sarah began, watching Elena's hand drop from the small pendant she'd been unconsciously holding. "You laugh at my terrible jokes even when they're not funny, because you want me to feel safe being myself. You smell like sandalwood and something else I can't identify, and I've been trying to figure it out for 3 weeks." Sarah paused, gathering courage from some place she hadn't known existed until recently. "And you look at me sometimes," she continued, quieter now, "like you're trying to solve an equation that doesn't have a solution. Like you want something, but don't know if you're allowed to want it." "You told me to look for pilot lights instead of fireworks, Elena. But I see yours. I've been seeing it this whole time." The silence that followed was broken only by the bass line, steady and insistent, and the quiet murmur of the couple 3 seats down, ordering another round. Elena's eyes had gone bright in the dim light, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "This is where I'm supposed to tell you it's a bad idea, that you're newly out, still figuring yourself out, that I have a decade of failed relationships with late bloomers who decided I was practice, not the real thing. Is that what you think this is?" Sarah asked. "I don't know what this is," Elena admitted, and the honesty in it hurt in the best way. "That terrifies me." Sarah reached across the small space between them, not for Elena's hand, not quite yet, but for her glass. Their fingers touched as Sarah moved it aside, setting it on the bar with deliberate care. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like falling. "I'm 42 years old," Sarah said, her hand now resting on the bar between them. An invitation, not a demand. "I spent 20 years in a marriage I thought was fine because I didn't know what I was missing. I've read every book, watched every recommended movie, done the work in therapy, and none of it, Elena, none of it has felt as real as sitting in my depressing gray apartment eating Thai food with you, or watching you explain pilot lights in a bookstore, or right now, this exact moment, trying not to completely mess this up. She took a breath that shook slightly at the edges. So, yes, I'm new to this, to being out, to dating women, to all of it. But I'm not new to knowing when something matters. And you matter. This matters. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, or that I have any idea what I'm doing. But I'm not practicing on you, Elena. I'm trying, terrified and clumsy as that is, to tell you that I'm ready. Not for some hypothetical future woman. For you. The jazz trio finished their song, and in the brief silence before the next one began, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent and alive. Elena looked at her with an expression that held too many things to name: fear and hope, and something that looked dangerously like trust. If we do this, she said carefully, we can't go back. The coaching relationship ends. We start over, as equals, as two people who are both scared and both hoping, and both have absolutely no idea if this will work. I know, Sarah said. I need you to be sure. I've never been less sure of anything, Sarah admitted, and smiled that dry smile Elena had called her on their first meeting. But I'm choosing it anyway. That counts for something, right? Elena's laugh was small and real, and carried relief in it like rain. Yeah, Sarah, that counts for everything. She reached out then, not tentative, not asking permission, but with the confidence of someone who'd decided to trust despite every instinct telling her to protect herself. Her hand covered Sarah's on the bar, warm and solid and right. So, Elena said, her thumb tracing a small circle against Sarah's palm. Do you want to get out of here? Go somewhere we can actually talk, without a bartender listening in? She's not listening, Sarah said. She's absolutely listening. It's her job. Fair point. Sarah stood, leaving cash on the bar that was probably too much, but who cared, really, when everything had just shifted sideways into possibility. Your place or mine? Yours, Elena said immediately. I want to see if you lit that candle. I lit it, Sarah said, and felt absurdly proud of this small act of becoming someone who lived in her own space. It smells like winter cashmere, which I'm pretty sure isn't a real scent. It's not, Elena confirmed, standing and not letting go of Sarah's hand. But it smells good anyway. They walked out into the November night, cold enough to see their breath, late enough that the streets were quiet, early enough that the world felt like possibility rather than ending. Sarah's car was 3 blocks away. They walked slowly, hands still linked, not talking because there was too much to say, and it could wait until they had privacy and time, and weren't just 2 women standing on a sidewalk trying to figure out what came next. At Sarah's car, Elena stopped and turned, their hands still connected like a promise, or a question, or both. This is the first real step, Elena said. Not the ending, not the wedding, just the next thing. Are you okay with that? Sarah thought about her gray apartment with one lit candle, about the bookstore and pilot lights, about the terrifying, exhilarating space between knowing who you were and becoming who you'd always been, about the woman in front of her, who saw her completely and chose to stay anyway. I'm okay with that, Sarah said. I'm really, incredibly terrifyingly okay with that. Elena smiled, full and real, and reaching her eyes in that way that made Sarah understand why people wrote poems about this kind of thing, and squeezed her hand once, before letting go. "Then let's go home," she said. And they did.